Commission with our findings. They said, our priority in Libya has always been saving lives, protecting people, fighting trafficking and smuggling, and supporting the vulnerable. That's on paper. That's the official line at the summit, where Arab leaders have been raising the price for dealing with Europe's migration problem. Yet the human cost is measured not in euros, but in broken lives.
Matt Fry reporting. Well, joining us now from New York is the Portuguese Socialist member of the European Parliament and former diplomat, Ana Maria Gomes. Ms. Gomes, we have seen these shattering images from Libya, and one wonders whether the price paid by the European Union can possibly justify tolerating these terrible conditions in Libya.
Not at all. This is horrific, but it's no surprise. It's tremendous, the callousness, the hypocrisy, the cynicism of those in the European Union, in the European Commission, but as well in the European Council, all governments, including the British government, that are pretending that they are saving lives, where they know very well that in Libya there is no such thing as the Libyan Coast Guard. What there are militias infiltrated by all sorts of criminals, networks, and including terrorist groups. They are the ones who have been paid by the EU to pretend that they are a fictional Libyan Coast Guard to indeed push back the migrants. They are the ones who explore the migrants, who sell the migrants. This is nothing new. This already existed in the days of Gaddafi. But of course now, what is tremendous is the complicity of the EU. EU governments go after this fascist regime government in Italy of Salvini, who there's no indeed migrant crisis. The number of people arriving in Italy has decreased 95% compared to 2015,
well, now, Ms.
according
Gomes,
to the Commission figures.
Ms.
So
Gomes,
there is no real migration crisis, and it's the fact that European governments don't counter the narrative, the nasty narrative of right-wing governments such as the Salvini government that explains this shame.
Well, now, that may be what voters want, but what I want to know from you is there any possibility of your mustering some kind of majority in the European Parliament to roll this back, or is it just a rubber stamp?
Look, in the European Parliament, we have confronted numerous times the Commission and member states, the Council, with indeed this rhetoric that doesn't match the reality. But they keep denying it because they are afraid to counter the narrative. Even mainstream governments go after this nasty narrative of extreme right-wing, pretending there is a major migration crisis and that we are being invaded by foreigners. That's not true, and indeed they are, with their policy, actively conniving with a policy that indeed kills people, that indeed is about exposing people to torture, to this human trafficking. By not opening safe and legal ways, controlled ways, we are actually feeding the mafias that are running this trafficking, this human trafficking.
Bienvenue à tous. Welcome to Reporters here on France 24. I'm Mark Owen. In this edition, Italy is hailing success in its battle against the migrant crisis. The reason? Well, a 70% drop in people being trafficked across the Mediterranean. Unprecedented cooperation between Italy and Libya is at the heart of this. Italy has given ships and provided training for Libyan coastguards. A success, undoubtedly, as fewer migrants are perishing at sea. Is there still a migrant problem? Yes, there is. Are the fundamental reasons behind the mass migration resolved? No. But Italy has come up with a quick fix that might just continue to save lives, as well as provide a political solution for the government of Paolo Gentiloni. Meanwhile, the migrants stuck in Libya face new problems, such as being sold into slavery. Our reports by Natalia Mendoza.
The Mediterranean, just off the Libyan coast. The crew of the Aquarius, a boat chartered by SOS Mediterranean, an NGO that assists illegal immigrants, are preparing for a rescue mission.
Do you hear me? Vous m'entendez? Bonjour. Hello, you speak English, français? Français, d'accord. Il faut que vous m'écoutiez.
You must listen to me. We're a humanitarian organisation. We're going to bring you onto our boat. We'll take you to Italy, Europe, okay? But it's important that you remain calm and quiet and that you listen to us. We're going slowly, one by one, okay? We're going to give you life jackets.
50 or so migrants have just left Libya on this dinghy.
All good, guys. Just one guy's getting a bit of pressure on his legs, so we're going to need to get him standing up before we distribute.
And they are trying to reach Italy.
Guys, we're going to distribute to the aft, remove some people from the aft, and then ask these guys at the
Once
front
on the
to
boat,
get back, so they're
the
gonna-
NGO Doctors Without Borders takes over.
Bienvenue, mon ami.
Welcome, friends. Are you okay? Very good. Let's take that off.
Après, on va prendre
Since
la-
last summer, these scenes are becoming more and more rare. This 68-metre boat can carry 500 people. But recently, it's been navigating almost empty. Marcella Cray is a coordinator for Doctors Without Borders. She has spent the last 7 months on the Aquarius. She checks the horizon every morning with her binoculars. She has never seen the sea quite so empty.
Normally this would be perfect conditions. You can see there's very little waves, there's not a lot of wind. When I first got here in March, we're coming out of the winter time, we could see definitely larger numbers of departures. Actually, even in winter, we had a lot more small boats coming out than we had expected. That, as summer went along, changed. We've seen in August, September, there were fewer. So again, the factors on land, the politics play a big role in this.
The political situation that Marcella mentions is personified by one man, Marco Minniti, the Italian Interior Minister, a specialist in intelligence. His success story? Negotiating directly with the Libyan Navy so that they stop all the illegal boats.
The first step is the control of the Libyan territorial waters. We've started to train the Libyan Coast Guard. We brought them to train in Italy, and they've graduated as sailors. We gave them 4 patrol boats, and before the end of the year, we'll give them 6 more.
Since the summer, the number of migrants arriving in Italy has dropped by 70%. To all appearances, it would seem that Minniti's tactics are a success. But there is a dark side. Lorenzo Cremonesi, a journalist from Corriere della Sera, exposed the scandal. he revealed a secret deal between the Italian Interior Ministry and the militias run by the traffickers in Sabrata. This city is also known as smugglers' capital.
The deal was, apart a lot of facilities like weapons, guns, kind of, in bracket, humanitarian help, in effect was helping the militia to work. And 5 million euro every month, but actually we understood at the beginning was one-shot deal, but then we understood from their word that it was 5 million every month. 5 million euro every month paid by the Italian to this group.
The source of these revelations, the intelligence services of Sabrata.
They had the proof of the meetings between the brother of Ahmed Dabashi, the brother who is the head of one of the militia, who is, because Dabashi is wanted, so he cannot move. His brother is still, between bracket, clean. So they were meeting in Tunis. They even told me the name of the hotel in between end of June and beginning of July. They were meeting in Malta. They gave me even the number of the flight. There is a private flight every day almost from Tripoli to Malta. They told me which day, where it happens, which hotel. They spied this guy.
Officially, the Italian government denies all contact with the militias. But the NGO Human Rights Watch is concerned by this apparent pact.
We are concerned that European Union policies that seem to be driven quite a lot by Italy these days with respect to Libya are, they're certainly contributing to trapping people in incredibly abusive situations, and they very well may be destabilizing the country even further. Clearly, if that's the plan, they need to realize that they're dealing with very unreliable partners and very dangerous ones.
Last September, Sabrata was at the heart of a violent power struggle between the different militia, resulting in 40 dead and several thousand people fleeing the combat. We were able to go to Sabrata to interview the mayor, Hussein Dawadi. He confirms contact with the Italian government, but avoids the question of secret agreements with the militias.
There is aid from the Italian government that will shortly arrive in Sabrata. We have discussed this with them and established this cooperation for the benefit of the town. But any other deal or non-official approach I cannot comment on, because I have no proof of this.
No proof, but yet, since the summer, more than 20,000 migrants have been arrested by the militias in Sabrata and locked up there. Some of them have just been transferred to government-run centres. We visited one of these, 80 kilometers south of Tripoli.
You go over there. One at a time.
Colonel Abdel Hamid Said is the director of this centre.
They're all illegal immigrants. Some of the women are pregnant. All these people need medical help. Food and blankets. You can see for yourselves.
Here, they are also aware of the alleged deal made between Rome and the militias.
It's true that we've heard that certain militias in Sabrata received aid from Italy to stop illegal immigration. But here, as a center that's dependent on the Ministry of the Interior, we haven't received anything.
Men, women, but also children. More than 3,000 people are stuck here, without due process and without the possibility of assistance. They spend their days in containers that overheat under the sun. The director tries to put on a good show in front of the camera, even using the centre's translator to help out a little bit.
When did you
With the second highest death toll of all African conflicts, the Nigerian Civil War, also known as the Biafran War, is perhaps the single most significant event in Nigerian history. This 3-year conflict, which raged on from the 6th of July 1967 till the 15th of January 1970, would claim the lives of over 100,000 soldiers and an estimated 2 million civilians, as the Nigerian government, led by General Yakubu Gowon, fought to prevent the secession of the self-proclaimed Republic of Biafra, which was led by General Chukwuemeka Odumegu Ojukwu. To fully understand the root cause of this brutal conflict, we need to go all the way back to the very beginning. Upon gaining independence from Great Britain in 1960, the newly formed Nigerian Republic was greatly divided, as its 3 largest ethnic groups struggled to live in harmony. Beyond the more obvious distinctions like language, clothing, and marriage customs, Nigeria's 3 main ethnic groups also had fundamental differences in values and worldviews, which had been developed over the many centuries leading up to the colonial era and the formation of the Nigerian state. The Igbos, who represented about 60 to 70% of the population of the southeast, were mostly Christians who in the centuries before the colonial era had lived in relatively egalitarian societies. Although most Igbo towns and villages were headed by monarchs known as Ezes, the political decision-making process within Igbo communities was actually quite democratic, as it involved general assemblies composed of title holders and other respected members of Igbo society. Status was acquired through one's ability to solve societal issues, and respect was given primarily to those who had acquired wealth, as opposed to those who had simply inherited it. The character of Okonkwo in the book Things Fall Apart by renowned Nigerian author Chinua Achebe was in many ways the perfect illustration of the uniquely Igbo vision of the self-made man. The Igbo's particular appreciation for wealth creation through hard work is undoubtedly the main reason why many of Nigeria's champions of industry have been of Igbo ancestry. By contrast, the majority Muslim Hausa Fulani, which represented about 65% of the northern population, had lived for many years in feudal societies in which large working-class populations were ruled by a small theocratic elite composed of emirs and sultans. As their political leaders often doubled as religious leaders, compliance and submission to the will of the political establishment was not simply a civic duty, but a religious one. Very much unlike in Igbo societies, there was nothing particularly odd or shameful about a man aspiring to live a modest life as a farm worker, craftsman, or a nomadic cattle herder. But contrary to commonly held prejudices, the Hausa Fulani were not in any way lazier or inherently less enterprising than their southern counterparts. They simply had a deeper appreciation for religious discipline and had a more socially conservative worldview. However, there is no denying the fact that while the unquestioning submissiveness of northern societies to the theocratic establishment guaranteed internal stability and order, it also meant that the North was a lot less economically vibrant. Northerners were generally less open to new ideas and often completely rejected secular education in favor of Islamic education. Demonstrating the extent of Nigeria's North-South divide, some studies estimated that as at Nigeria's independence in 1960, northern Nigeria had an English literacy rate of just 2%, compared to the Southeast, which had an English literacy rate of 19.2%. The Yorubas, which formed about 75% of Nigeria's southwestern population, were in many ways a sort of halfway house between the Igbos and the Hausa Fulani, both in terms of their religious affiliation and their political history. Although also majority Christian, they nevertheless had significant populations of Muslims as well as followers of the ancient Yoruba religions. In simple terms, the traditional Yoruba political structure was basically less autocratic than the Hausa Fulani, but not as democratic as the Igbo. For centuries, Yoruba societies were ruled by kings known as Obas, who governed in close consultation with chiefs, priests, and priestesses. Culturally, the Yorubas were quite similar to the Igbo in their appreciation for individual drive and ambition. However, the Yorubas tended to channel their energies towards excellence in the arts and academia, as opposed to pure industry and wealth creation. Many often point to the Yorubas' deep appreciation of the arts as the reason why many of Nigeria's most prominent cultural icons, such as Afrobeat legend Fela Kuti and the Nobel Prize laureate Professor Wole Soyinka, have been of Yoruba ancestry. But to say that the differences between Nigeria's three main tribes meant that every Igbo, Yoruba, or Hausa Fulani person hated anyone who wasn't from their tribe would be very far from the truth. In reality, most Yoruba societies got on well enough with Igbo societies. The main culture clash, if you like, was between the Hausa Fulanis of the north and the two major ethnic groups of the south. Prior to the colonial era, ancient Yoruba kingdoms such as the Oyo Empire had for many years suffered under several waves of jihadi attacks by the Islamic Sokoto Caliphate of the north, led by the famous Sultan Uthman Dan Fodio. Now, although the Igbos did not have a similar history of warring with the Hausa Fulani, the British colonial enterprise would create the perfect environment for the sharp differences between these two tribes to be brought to the forefront. In 1914, British High Commissioner Frederick Lugard effectively created the country we know today as Nigeria by bringing the northern and southern regions together in the now infamous Nigerian Amalgamation of 1914. Till this very day, the feeling amongst many Yoruba and Igbo historians is that one of the main purposes of this amalgamation was to place the more affluent South under the control of the autocratic North. The theory goes that by joining the more educated and therefore less controllable southern region to the much larger northern region, the British government was better able to implement its policy of indirect rule, as the amalgamation essentially gave dominion over the entire country to the northern elites, who were significantly less rebellious and generally more amenable to British interests. It is also worth noting that from 1914 onwards, the British adopted a practice of placing northerners in key leadership positions within the colonial administration. Despite being generally better educated, southerners were more often than not limited to managerial and executive roles within the colonial apparatus. When the struggle for Nigeria's independence began to take shape, it was mainly Yoruba and Igbo intellectuals such as the political activist Fumi Ransom Kuti and the renowned jurist Jaja Wachukwu that led the fight for Nigeria's sovereignty. According to some historians, many of the northern elites were not at all welcoming to the idea of an independent Nigeria, as they feared that independence would mean losing the privileged positions that they had enjoyed under the colonial structure. The story goes that as a condition for them agreeing to support the push for Nigeria's independence, the northern leadership specifically demanded that the new nation maintained its colonial political structure. And even though it pretty much guaranteed a continuation of the North's dominance, the Igbo and Yoruba leaders, in their desperation to gain independence at all costs, agreed to the North's demands. And so upon its independence on the 1st of October 1960, the Nigerian state was divided into three geopolitical regions, in which a disproportionately large northern region was united with two smaller eastern and western regions. Nigeria's British-style parliamentary government was led by its first and only Prime Minister, Alhaji Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, the northern co-founder of his political party, the Northern People's Congress. Tafawa Balewa's NPC party governed in coalition with the Igbo-aligned National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons, which was led by Nigeria's Governor General, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, the man who would later go on to serve as the ceremonial president of the First Nigerian Republic, which was established in 1963. The Yoruba-aligned Action Group Party, which was headed by Chief Obafemi Awolowo, played the opposition role. If unity was the goal, then the Nigerian state had gotten off to a very bad start. Nigeria's parliamentary system was a bit of a farce, as Nigeria's three main parties were not built around ideology, but on ethnic nationalism. With the vast majority of Nigeria's general population still largely unfamiliar with the Western-style democratic system of their new country, pretty much everyone voted based on ethnicity. The Southwesterners voted for the AG, the Southeasterners for the NCNC, and the Northerners for the NPC. And as the Northern region was by far the largest constituency, the NPC was basically guaranteed control over Nigeria, as none of the other two parties could compete with the NPC's large northern voting base. As you can imagine, it was only a matter of time before the shoddy foundations on which the Nigerian state had been built began to show serious signs of strain. The entrepreneurial spirit of the Igbos would see many of them move out of their hometowns in search of all the opportunities their new nation had to offer. From Lagos to Benin, Port Harcourt, and even major northern cities like Kano and Kaduna, Igbos began to build businesses and pioneer new industries in the places they migrated to. But as is often the case with successful immigrants, it wasn't long before many of the locals, especially in the north, began to feel more than a bit uncomfortable with the success of their new neighbors.
One thing I've noticed, Premier, while I've been here, is that Northerners seem to have, I might almost call it, obsession about the Igbos. Could you perhaps explain that to me?
Well, the Igbos are more or less the type of people whose desire is mainly to dominate everybody. If they go to a village, to a town, they want to monopolize everything in that area. If you put them in a labor camp as a laborer, within a year they will try to emerge as headman of that camp, and so on. Well, in the past, our people were not alive to their responsibilities, because you can see from our northernization policy that in 1952, when I came here, there weren't 10 northerners in our civil service here. Then I tried to have it northernized, and now all important posts are being held by northerners.
Is this policy of filling all key posts in the north solely with northerners and not with other Nigerians a temporary or a permanent one?
In actual fact, what it is a northerner first. If you can't get a northerner, then we take an expatriate like yourself on contract. If we can't, then we can employ another Nigerian, but on contract too. This is going to be permanent, I should say, as far as I can foresee, because it will be rather dangerous to see the number of boys who are now turning from all our learning institutions coming out with having no work to do. I'm sure whichever government of the day might be, it will feel rather embarrassed, and it might even lead to bloodshed.
Doesn't this damage the idea, sir, of all people in all regions in Nigeria being fellow citizens of one country?
Well, it might, but you are, new to our region, but how many northerners are employed in the east or in the west? The answer is no. And if there are, there may be 10 laborers employed only in the two regions.
It was against this backdrop of rising anti-Igbo sentiment in the north that the chain of events that ultimately led to the Civil War would begin to unfold. By as early as the year 1966, most Nigerians had already begun to resent the ruling elite for their lavish lifestyles and lack of sensitivity to the concerns of the masses. Rumors about vote rigging, corruption, and backdoor deals between politicians and foreign companies began to spread, and there was a general sense of discontentment in the air. deciding that enough was enough, Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogu, an Igbo officer in the Nigerian army, instigated a revolutionary coup against the federal government. This coup would see the assassination of the Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa, the Premier of the Northern Region Sir Ahmadu Bello, as well as the Premier of the Western Region, Chief Samuel Akintola. But rather suspiciously, the President, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, would manage to escape the bloodbath as he was out of the country on holiday when the coup took place. But despite the execution of many key members of the government, the coup led by Major Nzeogu was ultimately unsuccessful, as it was quashed by a different faction of the Nigerian army, led by Major General Johnson Aguiyi Ironsi, who, interestingly enough, was also of Igbo ancestry. After managing to secure the surrender of the coup plotters, Aguiyi Ironsi was declared military head of state. But even though both the instigator and the stopper of the coup were of Igbo descent, various conspiracy theories began to spread in the north, suggesting that the entire thing was all part of an undercover master plan to put General Aguiyi Ironsi in power and transfer control of Nigeria over to the Igbos. Oddly enough, there was actually a fair bit of evidence in support of this theory. 4 out of 5 of the coup plotters were Igbo, and although Aguiyi Ironsi stopped the coup, he did not execute any of the coup plotters. To make matters worse, no significant Igbo leader was killed in the coup. President Nnamdi Azikiwe had avoided all the drama thanks to his suspiciously timed holiday, while Michael Okpara, the Premier of the Eastern Region, had also managed to survive the coup, even though he did end up losing his job to Colonel Chukwuemeka Ojukwu, the man who would later go on to lead Biafra's attempt to break away from Nigeria. These anti-Igbo conspiracy theories would eventually grow from mere rumor and conjecture to an article of faith in the minds of many Northerners. And on the 29th of July 1966, a group of Northern Army officers instigated a counter-coup against the Ironsi administration. Unlike the previous one, this coup was successful. Major General Aguiyi Ironsi was assassinated, and Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon, a Northerner, was installed as Nigeria's new military head of state. Unfortunately, the northern retaliation would not end there. In the 3 months following the coup, an estimated 8,000 to 30,000 Southeasterners living in the north would be attacked, killed, and robbed by local mobs. Fearing for their lives, over 1 million Southeasterners fled back to their homelands, leaving behind businesses, homes, churches, and in some unfortunate cases, children that had been the fruit of inter-ethnic marriages. With the deluge of refugees flooding back into the eastern region with shocking stories of betrayal and trauma, the Nigerian project was on the brink of collapse. As many Easterners no longer felt safe in other parts of Nigeria, the military governor of the Eastern region, Colonel Ojukwu, began to call for Igbos from all around Nigeria to return home. Rumors about the Eastern region's impending breakaway from Nigeria became front-page news after it was reported that a plane carrying imported weapons had crashed in the eastern city of Enugu. Knowingly or unknowingly, Colonel Ojukwu essentially confirmed all rumors with a series of rousing criticisms of the Gowon administration's failure to provide adequate protection to the thousands of Igbos who were being attacked and killed by people they imagined were their fellow citizens. With tensions at an all-time high, General Yakubu Gowon and other key members of the government agreed to meet with Colonel Ojukwu at a neutral location so that both sides could try to de-escalate the situation. This 2-day meeting will take place in the Ghanaian town of Aburi from the 4th to the 5th of January 1967. To Gowon's great surprise, Colonel Ojukwu took the meeting very seriously and was very well prepared. He set out very clearly all of the Eastern region's demands, which included greater political autonomy, greater control over the revenue from the Southeast oil deposits, and also a restructuring of the Nigerian army in a way that devolved powers to the regions and got rid of the unfair recruitment quota system, which had allowed for a disproportionately large number of northerners to join the Nigerian army. Although many still debate what exactly was agreed at this meeting, General Ojukwu left Aburi fully convinced that Gowon had accepted all of the Eastern region's demands. This controversial agreement, known today as the Aburi Accord, was not honored by the Gowon administration. Upon returning to Nigeria, General Yakubu Gowon decided instead to break Nigeria's regions into smaller states and turn Nigeria into an American-style federation composed of 12 states. Except unlike in the American system, each state had very little autonomy and very little control over its own resources. For many in the southeast, this was the last straw. With the Gowon administration having put its cards on the table, Colonel Ojukwu's mind was made up. He proceeded to consult with the various chiefs and traditional rulers of the eastern region, and on the 30th of May 1967, Ojukwu officially announced the secession of the eastern region and the establishment of the state of Biafra. And with the support of many key members of the southeastern leadership, Colonel Ojukwu cut all ties with the Nigerian army and was proclaimed General Ojukwu, Biafran President and Commander-in-Chief of the Biafran Army. The declaration of Biafra's secession was celebrated in the streets. For many, the establishment of Biafra was a long-awaited restoration of the pre-colonial sovereignty of the region and the beginning of a bright new dawn for its people. But unfortunately, the celebrations would be short-lived, as the Nigerian government's response was to declare war on Biafra. And although the Biafran army had no air force, no navy, and a chronic shortage of weapons and manpower, General Ojukwu was surprisingly optimistic about his new nation's ability to withstand the Nigerian army.
If civil war comes, and I do think it is imminent, you're quite right, it will for us be the price of freedom. Our people here have for a long time been prepared for this eventuality, and I am confident of their readiness. I think that when it does come, that the people on the other side would be surprised as to what they're going to get. And I'm confident that it will not last long. I can't say for certain what Lagos has got. When we lost direct contact with Lagos, they had some 4 battalions, ill-equipped, and I know that they have been purchasing a lot of arms since, and I know that they have negotiated and received a few armored vehicles. Prior to that, they had some scout cars. I know they have tried to get planes. I am not sure they have got them there. But on our side, we too have not been sitting quietly. There has been quite a lot of build-up. And I think what I have here is sufficient to maintain the integrity of Biafra and more.
But putting aside General Ojukwu's confident fighting talk, the reality of the matter was that Biafra was by far the underdog in this fight. The Nigerian military was larger, better funded, better trained, and had secured the support of Britain and other world powers. The expectation in Lagos was for the war to be over within a matter of weeks, or in the very worst case scenario, 6 months. But much to the surprise of the Nigerians, the Biafran army would prove a lot more resilient than they could have ever imagined. Despite being composed of a largely untrained and unskilled group of young men and teenage boys, the Biafrans would manage to withstand the Nigerian onslaught for 3 brutal years. The early campaigns of the Nigerian forces were quite successful, as they quickly managed to reclaim significant Biafran cities and monuments. But after nearly a year of fighting, the war reached a stalemate as the Biafran army began to stand its ground and maintain control of key cities and towns. Within the nation itself, the civilian population tried to carry on living life as normally as they could. With most of the men and boys on the battlefront, it was up to the women to manage the day-to-day running of the country. But as the war raged on, any hopes that the civilian population had of continuing to live their normal lives began to fade away. With both sides unable to reach an agreement, despite several attempts at peace talks, including one in Ethiopia presided over by Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie, the Gowon administration came to the very reckless conclusion that the only way to break the deadlock would be to trigger its nuclear option. The Gowon-led forces mobilized to impose an economic blockade on Biafra, which blocked the flow of all food and ammunition supplies by land, air, and sea. This move would turn out to be perhaps the single most destructive political decision in West African history, as it would ultimately lead to the death by malnourishment of an estimated 2 million civilians, most of whom were children suffering from the protein deficiency disease known as kwashiorkor. You see, prior to the war, dietary protein in the Biafran diet primarily consisted of locally sourced seafood, as well as dried stockfish, which was imported from Norway. Other sources of protein such as chicken, pork and beef were generally only enjoyed on special occasions, as they were often too expensive for the wider population. But as the blockade prevented the importation of Norwegian stockfish, and also restricted the local fishermen's access to the seas, the region's protein supplies were quickly depleted, and the national diet was reduced to almost 100% starch. As the war took place around the golden era of TV media, the images of millions of malnourished Biafran children, projected on TV sets worldwide, would be one of the global community's earliest introductions to the now infamous trope of the starving African child. Although the Nigerian government strategy was indefensible, it is important to point out that the government's supposed reasoning at the time was that the blockade would be nothing more than a short, sharp shock, and that General Ojukwu, seeing the immense suffering of his people and the dwindling ammunition of his frontline soldiers, would have no other choice but to surrender. However, what the Nigerians had failed to realize was that the Biafran state had secured the support of a foreign benefactor of its own. Although the only countries to publicly recognize the state of Biafra were Tanzania, Gabon, the Ivory Coast, Zambia, and Haiti, Charles de Gaulle's France had taken a secret interest in Biafra, as it saw it as the perfect addition to its sphere of influence in West Africa. According to French President Charles de Gaulle, Biafra was a just and noble cause, and so working closely with the French-aligned governments of the Ivory Coast under President Félix Houphouët-Boigny and the Gabonese Republic, led by President Omar Bongo, the French government helped to prolong the war by providing Biafra with weapons, mercenary fighters, and as much food as could be smuggled past the Nigerian blockade. France also publicized Biafra's cause on the international stage, describing the situation as nothing short of a genocide. The eventual discovery of France's involvement in the war would lead to protests on the streets of Lagos, with many accusing the French government of being the real reason why the war had continued, despite the fact that the Biafran forces had very little chance of overcoming the Nigerian military. But did France really get involved in the war simply because Charles de Gaulle considered Biafra to be a just and noble cause? Well, not exactly. France's involvement was all about economics and had very little to do with some romantic desire for the Biafran people to share in the French ideals of liberté, égalité, and fraternité. Later investigations will show how the French state-owned oil company ELF had secured lucrative drilling agreements with the Biafran state. Had Biafra successfully seceded from Nigeria, these agreements would have guaranteed ELF access to the equivalent of 7% of Nigeria's oil supply and given the French government a nice slice of the Nigerian pie, which since the discovery of oil back in 1956 had been enjoyed solely by the Shell BP oil company. Although the French government tried to keep his ties to Biafra secret, General Ojukwu did very little to hide his country's French connection. From as early as the first year of the war, General Ojukwu had already begun to suggest that French would be made compulsory in Biafran secondary, technical, and teacher training schools. In his own words, he was very keen for his people to benefit from the rich culture of the French-speaking world. As the death toll began to rise exponentially, the whole world was becoming more aware of the level of carnage and immense suffering of the Biafran people. The Nigerian diaspora was galvanized, and protests and counter-protests began to take place on the streets of London and New York. Some Nigerians blamed General Ojukwu for the deaths of his own people, arguing that by continuing in a war that he knew fully well he could not win, he was putting his personal ambition ahead of the lives of millions of people. But for many in the Biafran diaspora, the economic blockade was nothing short of a vicious genocide aimed at exterminating the Igbo people once and for all. Another accusation that was thrown at General Ojukwu was that the only way he managed to cajole his army and his people to continue in the fight for Biafra was by reporting stories of false victories and by giving false guarantees about the imminent end of the war. On the Nigerian side, the government continued to double down on its position. Despite reports of horrific levels of death and suffering, the Gowon-led government refused to blink first and continued to accuse General Ojukwu of killing his own people by lying to them about their chances of winning the war.
I do not wish to say anything on this occasion that might be regarded as prejudicial to the peace talks now going on in Kampala, Uganda. But in the words of Mr. Asika, the rebel leaders ought to know when enough is enough. They should call a halt to the shameless deception of innocent Igbos with reports of fictitious victories on the battlefronts. They should appreciate that the so-called diplomatic recognition by dubious characters cannot, in the least, alter the course of Nigerian history. It is sheer wickedness for Ojukwu and his clique to continue to goad innocent citizens to support rebellion and lay down their lives for a cause that is not just. The rebel leaders know in their hearts of hearts that all their false propaganda about genocide and massacre derives from personal ambition and the haunting fear of their own future and safety. Consequently, they do not know when to stop. I call on those who claim to love Nigeria and the Igbos to face realities and advise the people of the East Central State to lay down their arms and return to the fold. It is not enough for organizations and individuals to ask the federal government to cease hostilities while ignoring the evil intentions of the rebels. I honestly believe it is in the true interest of the Igbos that they return to the fatherland. I am satisfied that all other Nigerians have learned the lesson of our most recent history and the current civil war. And I pray to God that there will never be a repetition.
You see, contrary to popular belief, the Biafran government was much more than just a rebel military force. General Ojukwu also assembled a group of elite writers and artists who were tasked with cultivating nationalist spirit at home and also spreading Biafra's message on the world stage. Political cartoons were put up all around the country, pushing simplistic interpretations of the causes of the war and demonizing not just the Nigerian military, but the Nigerian populace at large. On the international stage, notable members of the Biafran apparatus, such as Chinua Achebe and Gabriel Okara, publicized the plight of the Biafran people. They regularly denounced the actions of the Nigerian government and spoke about the atrocities they had witnessed in the country. The Biafran story became front-page news, and more members of the international community began to call on their own governments to take action. On the 29th of May 1969, Bruce Mayrock, an American student at Columbia University, set himself on fire at the United Nations headquarters in New York in protest of what he believed was a genocide against the nation and people of Biafra. He was pronounced dead the very next day. With more and more of their own citizens calling for political intervention, the response from Nigeria's international backers was to ramp up their military support for the Nigerian forces to help them break the Biafran resistance once and for all. With their increased firepower, the Nigerian Federal Forces launched another major attack on the Biafran defense in the last week of December 1969. This final offensive, known as Operation Tailwind, was executed by a battalion led by Colonel Olusegun Obasanjo, a man who would later go on to be a two-time president of Nigeria. Operation Tailwind would ultimately break the deadlock. After over 3 weeks of heavy fighting, the last two major strongholds of Owerri and Uli fell to the Nigerian forces. Unwilling to go down with the Biafran ship, General Ojukwu fled by plane to the Ivory Coast, leaving behind his deputy Philip F. Young to negotiate the terms of Biafra's surrender to General Yakubu Gowon on the 14th of January 1970.
The so-called rising sun of Biafra is set forever. It will be a great disservice for anyone to continue to use the word Biafra to refer to any part of the East Central state of Nigeria. The tragic chapter of violence is just ended. We are at the dawn of national reconciliation. Once again, we have an opportunity to build a new nation. You will have heard that my government may seek the assistance of friendly foreign governments and bodies, especially in the provision of equipment to supplement our national effort. There are, however, a number of foreign governments and organizations whose so-called assistance will not be welcome. These are the governments and organizations which sustained the rebellion. They are thus guilty of the blood of thousands who perished because of the prolongation of the futile resistance. They did not act out of love for humanity. Their purpose was to disintegrate Nigeria and Africa and impose their will on us.
To say that the Nigerian government did not do enough to bring healing and reconciliation in the years following the war would be a gross understatement. Even the federal troops that were deployed to assist in the resettlement of the survivors of the war would be accused of taking advantage of the people that were there to help.
I have complaints about the behavior of your troops. Many women say they've been molested and raped. Men say their property has been taken away from them, looted. Do you know anything about this?
I don't think that is true to say general looting and raping and the rest of it. That couldn't be true. You know, in every war, there's always one or two odd soldiers who will behave in the out of the general pattern. And well, I won't deny that there will be cases of this. And you do realize that it's not very easy for officers to be there all the time to check this type of thing. But everything is being done to keep the soldiers out of the villages, out of the roads, out of the towns.
But here in the centre of this town, Phil, I've personally seen soldiers taking household gear away from people's homes, loading it onto trucks and driving away. A sergeant major stopped one truck and made them take some stuff off.
That sometimes we carry refugees with their belongings from the towns to the villages.
Yeah.
This could be.
But this was just property being taken out of a house, furniture, a bedstead, among other things.
Well, that might be one of the cases, the few odd cases I've talked about. But there are always people around who will check this type of thing, you know.
Have the federal troops behaved badly since they came here? Have they beaten people?
That's seizing of their things. Seizing of their properties.
They seize property?
Properties, and they're forcing some girls and ladies.
They are
forcing them.
Forcing themselves on girls
yes,
and ladies?
Forcing them. Taking some wives from people try to do something in their lives.
Have they been killing people?
No. They don't kill civilians.
Do they bring food in with them to feed the population?
In fact, they don't. We are starving since 3 days now. I haven't taken anything.
You're hungry?
We're hungry. Very, very. Even my children, you can see them in the house now, lying down. Nothing to take.
The Biafran money, when we give them, they say no. The Biafran money is of no use.
It's unused.
Do you know anything about raping or looting?
No, I know nothing about that.
What about food supplies? Is it true that the relief supplies are not coming in?
Well, we have to make a distinction between the rural areas and the towns. It is coming into the towns because it's easier to arrange for transport. But obviously, it's more difficult to penetrate into the rural areas.
Have you seen any relief supplies here? Where's the feeding station?
No, this is my first visit to Owerri. I'm living about 8 or 9 miles away.
The people here say that there isn't such a centre.
Well, I've just come from the police barracks, and they are distributing food every day down in the police barracks to the people.
Through the police, not the Nigerian Red Cross.
Through the police.
The war had left millions of Igbos homeless, bereaved, and unemployed. To make matters worse, Nigeria had changed its currency during the war, and so the many Easterners who still held the old Nigerian currency were left in a very precarious position. The man who was tasked by the Gowon administration to rectify the problem was the former opposition leader, Chief Obafemi Awolowo, who at the time was Nigeria's Commissioner of Finance. His solution was to simply award every Easterner a grand total of 20 Nigerian pounds, regardless of how much money he or she had in their bank account prior to the war. For obvious reasons, this policy was seen as a deliberate attempt to cripple the economic recovery of the Igbo middle and upper classes. It was also at this time that the Gowon administration passed the controversial indigenization decree, which basically forced all foreign-owned companies operating in Nigeria to sell a proportion of their shares to Nigerian citizens. With many Igbos left with just 20 Nigerian pounds to their name, the main beneficiaries of the indigenization policy were the wealthy Yoruba and Hausa Fulani elites. Even till today, the wealth of a few of Nigeria's most prominent Hausa, Fulani and Yoruba families can be traced all the way back to shares that were acquired under Gowon's indigenization policy. A whole 50 years have now passed since the end of the Civil War, but the ghost of Biafra continues to haunt the Nigerian state. Just 1 year after the death of General Ojukwu in 2011, a group known as the Indigenous People of Biafra, or IPOB for short, became the latest among several post-war Biafran secessionist movements that have tried to lead a second Biafran breakaway. The response from the Nigerian government has again been very heavy-handed, showing how little has been learned from the mistakes of the war. The IPOB leader, Nnamdi Kanu, has been arrested and harassed numerous times by the Nigerian state, which has only helped to energize his base and build his cult-like following. The Biafran question now occupies a menacing position in Nigeria's political terrain, and with each passing day, it is becoming very clear that the Nigerian government can no longer continue to sweep the matter under the carpet. The IPOB are not the only independence movement threatening to break the Nigerian Union. The oil-rich Niger Delta region, which despite being the source of Nigeria's wealth, remains one of the most underdeveloped regions in the country, has for many years been riddled with militant separatist groups such as the Niger Delta Avengers and the Niger Delta Greenland Justice Mandate. Similarly, for many years, a number of groups in the Yoruba heartlands have been calling for the creation of a separate Yoruba state that would be known as the Oduduwa Republic. The one thing that unites all of these groups is the strong belief that nothing has really changed since colonial times. In other words, the only group that still has a vested interest in the continuity of the Nigerian Union are the northern elites. And in all honesty, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand why this view is so prevalent. There is no doubt that a breakup of Nigeria would most likely lead to economic ruin for a lot of rich and powerful northerners who could potentially find themselves left behind in a landlocked country with no access to the sea, no oil revenue, and a large undereducated population, of which an estimated 50% of women have no formal education. When Frederick Lugard created Nigeria back in 1914, it was arguable that he had no idea how badly the Nigerian project would turn out. But what has become very clear over a century later is that Nigeria in its current state just does not work. For a country as large and as diverse as Nigeria, the concentration of power in the Nigerian federal government is a recipe for disaster. With large sections of its population continuing to express feelings of marginalization and disconnection from the federal government, many have been putting forward the very sensible case for a restructuring of the country in a way that devolves power from the federal government to the various regions. This would mean giving each region power over their own resources and a greater ability to decide their own destinies. But while the idea of devolving powers from the federal government may be good for Nigeria as a whole, it would obviously mean a loss of power for those who benefit under the current system. For obvious reasons, these vested interests are the biggest stumbling blocks preventing any sensible conversation about the state of the nation. For the sake of the many innocent and peace-loving Nigerians, one can only hope and pray that the Nigerian establishment chooses to loosen its tight grip on power before it's too late. Once again, it's KB Taiwo for New Africa. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to see more content like this, then please like and share this video. And also consider supporting us on Patreon at www.patreon.com/newafrica. Thanks again for all your support, and until next time.
At independence in 1960, the huge human and natural resources across the regions that made up Nigeria stood out as strength for an evolving country. But these were soon to be tested in what many now refer to as one of the bloodiest civil wars in history. January 15, 1966 comes a twist that upset the peace in the Nigerian military circle, with some young officers led by Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nzogu, an Igbo officer from present-day Okpanam in Delta State, staging a coup d'etat against the then civilian government, killing dozens of people, including the Prime Minister of Nigeria, Tafawa Balewa, many senior politicians, senior army officers, many of them from the north. The officer gave reasons for the coup to include massive corruption and abuse of office. General Johnson Aguiyi Ironsi, who was the most ranking military officer, then assumes office. July 1966, the counter-coup which cut short the regime of General Ironsi, and then the emergence of Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon. Earlier, during the riot of May 1966, thousands of Easterners, mostly Igbos, were killed in many northern cities, especially in Kaduna, Kano, and Jos. The coming of Gowon to power did not stop the systematic killings. Such was the horror that attended Gowon's early days in office. By the end of 1966, thousands of refugees who were pouring into the east returned with tales of horror. A decision was then taken that soldiers and civilians should return to their region of origin. At a summit in Benin, the permanent secretaries presented a paper to Gowon that all the 4 regional military governors be replaced and new regions created to form 12 states in the federating unit. Although Ojukwu was absent at the meeting, he rejected the outcome and declared the Republic of Biafra.
The war just didn't start like that. There were stages. Things were happening, and then there were a number of conferences trying to stop it. But instead of getting better, it was getting worse. And there was preparation for war on both sides. We all knew this. And when it broke out, actually just before it broke out, Ojukwu, who was the leader on the Biafran side, decided to release those of us who were in prison, who were in detention by Ironsi's government, and we were on the eastern side of the country at the time. So this was the area of jurisdiction of Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu. Of course, he knew he wasn't doing it just to favor us. He knew that we would be useful to him in the war.
Other unresolved issues were the ethno-religious riots in northern Nigeria, alleged persecution of Igbos living in northern Nigeria, and control of the oil-rich Niger Delta. To settle a growing national instability, political negotiations, including the famous Aburi Accord, were initiated, but none could assuage the thirst of the Easterners for our secession.
Various political attempts were made to solve the problem, going even to Aburi in a meeting, the disagreement there, which really came about the interpretation what Aburi meant. And from Ojukwu, he says, on Aburi we stand. And I say, from Aburi you will fall.
Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuemeka Ojukwu declares the Republic of Biafra. and this was resisted by the federal government, resulting in the war from 1967 to 1970. There was a pogrom, mass starvation, leading to death of over 2 million civilians, including women and children.
The civil war, unfortunately, had to happen as a result of breakdown of that Aburi agreement. Despite effort that was made, to see if we can reconcile our differences and really save a very serious situation. But it got to the stage whereby Ojukwu, got his Constituent Assembly to give him the go-ahead to break away from Nigeria.
While the Nigerian military had all the firepower to execute the war, the Biafran soldiers largely depended on the ingenuity of its people, who went into research and production of war equipment.
I was selected to be one of those to join research production. Professor Pius Okeke was in physics. He's a nuclear physicist. He retired. He was selected also, and then one professor, is an energy specialist. Three of us were all, who I remember, who were selected to work with research and production as students. So most of us, I was there. I was part of the team that produced all the bombs, all the rockets, all those equipments. There was another team that was producing armored vehicles. So they are producing armored vehicles. We use a caterpillar. This tractor. This is a caterpillar that runs on wheels to produce armored vehicles. So Biafra produced all these equipments, and then we were able to sustain the war for that period of time.
The Iva Valley headquarters of research and production, also known as PRODA, had the best hands, some of whom came from the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. 78-year-old Emeka Onyiso, who witnessed the war, sheds light on how they operated.
It will surprise you what they were able to accomplish. One of the most outstanding accomplishments was what was branded Obunigwe. I'm sure you must have heard about it. And various other things. Obunigwe is a cone-shaped, sometimes cylindrical cluster bomb that disperses shrapnel with percussion. They even went as far as not only making these bombs, but providing guidance for quite some distance. And that's not a joke. That's not a joke within the short time they had to make them and use them. We had no option other than to refine crude petroleum for movement. Movement inside Biafra was maintained because our people were able to refine petrol into gas and petrol and the rest of it.
The major operational base, the famous Ojukwu Bunker and the Voice of Biafra, now houses the National War Museum. We're housing some of the relics of the Civil War, including the very famous Obunigwe.
In the army section, you have the armored cars. Then at the annex is the Obunigwe. The mass killer, two of them flying Obunigwe and his sitting place. Then these armored cars, majority of them were manufactured by the defunct Biafra. Then some of them were captured by the Nigerians or by the Biafran during the war course, even including the one they captured at Uguta, they call Uguta Boy, and even the gunboat they sunk at Uguta Lake, which is still there. We made a platform to exhibit it until it is brought. So all these ones were war relics. And I want to point out that recently the army came and also helped us to maintain it.
Though the museum now wears a toga commemorating a peaceful and unified Nigeria, our tour shows the magnitude of effort put in by the Biafrans towards self-actualization. The Biafran army also built an airstrip in Uli in Anambra State, where fighter jets took off and landed. Today, urban renewal and development is kicked in, with numerous houses encroaching. But there are now calls for it to be added on the list of national monuments.
When we lost Enugu Airport, of course we had to refer to Uli. We started using it. And because the Nigerian Air Force had superiority over Biafra, that time we didn't have even, we didn't have any aircraft. So they could come in broad daylight, start strafing or bombing or doing anything they liked. What we had to do was use machine guns, and you know that's no answer. Then we started acquiring aircraft, the one we call mini-coin. They will take off, come to the sneak to the target, shoot them, and they're gone.
The airstrip, to my mind, and to any good Igbo man, served wonderful purpose for the Biafran survival. The airstrip served as a place through which relief came into this place. Despite the fact that they were pursued, the planes were pursued by the federal troops. The Biafran intelligence unit had to construct what they call a bunker. The first time in history of the world where they had a bunker so that once the plane lands, it runs into a bunker so that the overriding or intruding plane does not catch it.
One of the sore points of the Biafra Civil War is the Asaba massacre of October 1967. It remains a sad commentary to the nation, and many who witnessed the incident believe the nation must not go through a similar path. Chief Philip Asiodu is an elder statesman, Professor Patu Tomi, a political economist, and Boniface Chizie is an economist, all of them indigenes of present-day Delta states.
When, as should be expected, the Biafrans then embarked on asymmetric warfare, so, guerrilla warfare, hit and run. So they come in the night, they will hit Nigerian soldiers, kill some of them and disappear. Out of that anger and fury that they've killed them, they'll be looking for any man that's in sight was targeted. And many Asaba men, able-bodied men, were killed. I remember vividly on 2 occasions I had gone to school. I went to school to teach and got stuck in the school. And got stuck in the school for quite some time, because it wasn't safe to leave the school and go back home.
One night, I crossed the Niger in a canoe from what was the Biafran side onto a war theater on the other side, what was the Midwest. And when I crossed, we had this horrible incident in Asaba where there had been a massacre of people who had come out to demonstrate, to wave, to welcome the federal troop approaching Asaba. And men were lined up, these women this way, and cold-blooded slaughter of thousands of people, literally. And so here I was coming with a group of friends, family. We're trying to cross from one part of the road to the other, from the bush, the jungle, as it were, and crossing the road that led from Asaba through Ibuza, Owashi, down, and we were, quote-unquote, captured. And we were lined up, men this way, women this way, and some fellow was saying to us, "Where are the rest of the rebels? Where are the rest of the rebels?"
The war ends in 1970 with General Gowon declaring no victor, no vanquished, and instituted what he termed the R's: rehabilitation, reconstruction, and reconciliation.
Reconciliation,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 117
Your Excellency.
Glad to see you again.
My pleasure.
How are you?
Very well indeed.
Glad to see you again.
I, Major General Pethium, officer administering the government of the Republic of Biafra, now wish to make the following declaration. That we affirm our loyal Nigerian citizens and accept the authority of the federal military government of Nigeria.
Materials were given to enable people build back their shacks. But quite interestingly, in places like Lagos, even the people who had properties and gone away, rents were collected, kept intact. When they came back, they were given. Badiwe and Co. and others. It's only in Port Harcourt, unfortunately, that they did these abandoned properties and took over people's properties. And you know, the Igbos had developed much of Port Harcourt. That was very, very unfortunate. And we must praise the Igbo man for his courage and resilience. In no time at all, despite the pogroms and all that, they were back in many of these cities.
However, this gesture of no victor, no vanquish was not well executed.
For me, the Civil War never ended. At the end of that war, it never ended. It's still going on. I had no family house. My poor mother went back to claim the property she was beating into a coma by people whom she had helped all her life and sent to school because she's an Igbo woman and now Port Harcourt belonged to another group of people. They forgot the sacrifices that the Igbos made. It's still going on. No apology has ever been made about that.
Unfortunately, after the change of government, with the program that we have, which was going to allow them to be able to be equal in all respect, unfortunately, yes, those that came probably did not have the belief and the philosophy that we have, that my government have, in order to ensure fairness to every part of Nigeria.
The unity, we saw it from fighting to remain united. We didn't do much in trying to get people to indoctrinate them through political interactions and the rest of them. So the moment you reintroduce politics, the first thing that came to our minds were what political parties and political system used to be before the Civil War. You saw that as a starting point. And once you see that, you could hardly change it.
Some of the combatants and commentators believe that not much has been done in the reconciliation and reintegration process.
How can I forget the past in this condition? Hunger is a disease. I have no food to eat. I will always tell my children this story for the sake of posterity.
Yes. They promised to pay us some compensation. They even asked us to register for it, but nothing has happened since then.
They call for a robust political inclusion and infrastructure development in the southeast, amongst others.
It's now 50 years after the war, and the reason for the war are still with us. All we are saying is that those issues that made our fathers go for war should be addressed. When there is true reconciliation, all these remnants of ventilation of anger and people venting their anger from this will downs.
5 zones
have benefited to serve within this country in the office of the president. The only way to establish that there is no victor, no vanquish is simple. A Southeasterner that will do what the president of Nigeria by 2023.
The people from Biafra, people from the southern region of Nigeria have been calling for roundtable discussion so that we can renegotiate in Nigeria. We can discuss about our future as a people. Like I said earlier, we believe in Nigeria. Here in every part of Nigeria, you will see Biafrans. The Igbo people are there, believing that we are one.
So how best can healing and national reconciliation be achieved?
The challenges we have in this country, apart from the cost of election and what have you, stems from the fact that people stay too long in power. And people do everything to remain in power. Within that one term, it can go to south, south, southeast, southwest, north central, this, that, and we start all over again. 6 times 6, 36 years. In 36 years, it's gone round all the geopolitical zones, and we start again. By the time we do that, some other people would have gotten sense of belonging. They would have gotten sense of belonging. The Igbos would have been given the opportunity to test power and then let them now decide whether they want to misuse power and forget about it forever, amongst other things. But give them that opportunity.
In 1991, after the return to democracy, Chief Ralph Uwazurike founded the movement for the actualization of the sovereign state of Biafra, MASOB, a group canvassing for the secession and sovereignty of eastern Nigeria. Another group, the Indigenous People of Biafra, IPOB, with similar objective, was founded by Nnamdi Kanu in 2012. He and his supporters resurfaced the agitation for the sovereign state of Biafra using an underground radio station called Radio Biafra to propagate their ideas. There were also protests, sometimes leading to confrontation with security agencies. In one of the face-off the group had with security agencies in his father's house in Oka, Anambra State, some persons sustained injuries, but government came out strong to deny the allegations, claiming that the group constantly violated the constitution. Eventually, the group was declared a terrorist group and then proscribed. The group has not stopped its agitation, as they now operate more using social media.
For him.
At the recent Never Again conference, some key suggestions on how to forge closer unity among ethnic nationalities in Nigeria were mooted. Many believe that there is need to address the issue of fairness and proper integration of the people from the southeast.
Nigerians have to reflect on the road we have passed. For example, the proposition can be made that we went to war because there was a failure of leadership. And in saying that, I will remind us that the 3 regions were really doing very well. The critical question is, why does Nigeria wobble so badly in spite of experience that should be driving it forward, and what can be done about it? I think we can list the reasons to include 1, a mistaken view that Nigeria is about how much you can extract from the national cake. A cake to eat makes poor tomorrow, but producing makes rich always. There is a duty that each and every one of us has. It is the duty to believe that it can be different, and that if we can dream it, we can make it happen. We are already in a crisis. If we, in our sober deference to reality, find that we can no longer hold together as one country, then let us together peacefully find a solution. And let us never again plunge into any kind of war among us.
on whichever side is about to repeat, yet again, the ultimate folly of sacrificing 2.5 million lives on the altar of absolutes, any absolute whatsoever. We should borrow that African credo, paint them on prayer scrolls, flood the skies in their millions with kites bearing that inscription, and balloons that read very simply, African lives matter.
Another issue raised is the need for the present leadership to consider merits in appointments as a way of national reconciliation.
By now, there is no group in Nigeria that does not have very qualified persons. We should go back to merit. We should go back to merit in addressing issues. The idea of physically disadvantaged and it doesn't fly anymore.
The entity called Biafra no longer exists as Nigeria has once again become a one united country. But the lessons from this war must always guide the leaders and the citizens of the country in the act of governance, loyalty, and commitment towards upholding the vision of the founding fathers. No part of this country must feel deprived enough that it will have to resort to war. And one way to start is perhaps the issue of constitution review, adoption on merits in appointment, and the issue of Igbo presidency. These may just be a few reasons for the Igbos to feel a sense of belonging.
They fought street to street, battling their way into the heart of the Libyan capital, Tripoli. It was in the summer of 2011 that France 24 broadcast this award-winning documentary, following Hassam Najjar and his men as they fought against those loyal to Muammar Gaddafi. We'll see Hassam again shortly, 10 years on, to see if the fight amongst the whirlwind of the Arab Spring for him was worth it. The assault on Tripoli had come after people had seen regimes and dictators fall, notably in the neighbouring countries of Tunisia and Egypt. In the east of Libya, Benghazi, a national transitional council, had declared itself the only legitimate body. As France became the first country to formally recognise it in March of 2011, French fighter jets carried out strikes, along with US and UK missiles, to drive Gaddafi forces from an advance on Benghazi. Over the coming months, thousands of bombardments by the international coalition to ease Gaddafi forces' route into Tripoli before it was taken. Muammar Gaddafi himself fled the capital, but kept insisting his regime had not fallen.
وهذا النظام البديع من المستحيل الإطاحة به. كيف يطاح بنظام متجسد في كل المواطنين الذين هم بالملايين. أما التشدق بالإطاحة بنظام القذافي هذا مدعاة للضحك.
A few months later, in October, the last decisive battle in the city of Sirte as Gaddafi himself was captured and killed. Well, the last 10 years, though, have been tumultuous for Libya. A series of attempts to form a legitimate government have failed, and once again, War has raged. The country also hit by the rise of the Islamic State group, which briefly took control of parts of the country. In 2015, a UN-supported government of national accord took power in Tripoli, but then the forces of an eastern strongman, Khalifa Haftar, began an attempt to take control, by 2019 advancing on the capital itself. His forces, though, eventually failed, although his power base remains in the east. Libya is still, then, a fractured country. Well, Gwendolyn de Bono with Josh Vardy revisit Libya for France 24.
When the revolution happened, I was here in Tripoli, but my family is based in Benghazi, and the revolution started there, so we decided to go to participate, not to sit and watch from home. It was one of the best times of my life.
Now the country is divided. The only thing we have not got is a line between the two sides. It's hard to feel where a reconciliation will come together.
وحاليا متواجد في بنغازي من منتصف 2018 تحديدا في قناة الحدث القناة المعروف دعمها للقوات المسلحة الجيش الوطني بقيادة المشير خليفة حفتر.
If they speak against anyone, it will be a big problem. You take care about your question about that. You have no right to speak freely.
We knew that he was here to become another authoritarian dictator in Libya.
A decade may have gone by, but Hussam Najjar hasn't experienced anything like that night in August 2011. At the time he was 32 and living in Ireland, but he decided to come back to his home country to fight. The rebel joined the Tripoli Brigade. After a summer of fighting against troops loyal to Muammar Gaddafi, Sam and his victorious comrades entered the Libyan capital.
We arrived down this street into what was then called the Green Square. Now we call it Martyr Square. And this is 10 years later. We see people moving freely around, and it's a good thing to see. When we arrived to the entrance of the square, I remember that I had said to myself,
Libya is free. I'm absolutely destroyed, mentally and physically. But inside, I'm screaming with joy.
I hadn't slept for 3 days before that, so I was starved and exhausted of energy at this point after fighting for at least 16 hours. I don't have much concentration anymore to fight. Once Martyr Square had fell, we knew that the end of Gaddafi was close. Coming into Martyr Square 10 years ago was probably the most exciting and happy time of my life.
10 years ago, it was the educated youth of Benghazi who first found the courage to stand up against Gaddafi's power. News of the euphoric fever taking hold of the eastern city reached Shada. She was studying in Tripoli and begged her father to let her return to Benghazi.
During that time when we went to Benghazi, we told our father, actually, me and my mom, if we went there, we just want to stay at home, we want to participate, we want to go in the streets and protest and so on. And that's actually what happened. So we were going in the streets and we noticed that there was an area for women to protest, and there was a man area. And with time, me and my mom and a couple of friends, we became like kind of in charge of that area. You do have a voice, and it matters. And there was a feeling that I felt for the very first time in my life.
Coastal towns in the west also started to rise in Benghazi's wake. Mohammed al-Bibi comes from Misrata. He took up arms at 16 to defend the city against the troops of the regime. Today, he's been reunited with his old comrades in arms positioned close to Sirte. In this city 10 years ago, he crossed the path of Gaddafi himself. The Libyan leader was on the run and had left his golden pistol in his vehicle. Mohammed seized it just before the dictator was captured.
When I got the gun, there were lots of shots being fired, and we didn't understand anything. But when we saw the huge crowd, we tried to understand what had happened, and we learned about the arrest of Gaddafi. And that was a great joy. For me, it was a much greater joy than getting my hands on that gun. We thought that with the arrest of Gaddafi and his son, the war would end in Libya. We thought we would have a happy life and that Libya would be free like Dubai. But we saw that nothing had changed. It had actually got worse.
The civil war never really ended. Libya was cut in two after Marshal Haftar took power in the east in 2014. In Tahuna, 60 kilometers south of Tripoli, several mass graves were discovered last summer. The town served as a military base for Haftar's men during his assault on the capital. He was defeated. Before fleeing the town, men from the militia murdered men, women and children. Families bring photos of their missing loved ones to the Tahuna town hall in the hope that they can be identified. Their children were abducted in front of them. Local officials have a hard time hearing the terrible tales.
I'm not asking you for anything. I don't want money. I don't care about all that. I just want my son.
What's his name?
This is Mohammed Yunus Ali Mokhtar.
How old is he?
He was born in 2000 and this one in 2002.
So he's 20 years old.
They came together in the middle of the night. They knocked on the door. I saw a man who asked me, "Where are your sons?" I said, "What do you mean? They're sleeping. They're asleep." I opened the window and saw that he had blocked the whole neighborhood. Then I figured out who he was. They searched all the houses and broke the door down. They broke the door down and took my children. I swear they were asleep. They were in their pajamas, under their duvets. They took them from under their duvets. I saw him pulling the t-shirt like that, and I was screaming, "Why? They're children. What did they do?" They told me, "No, we have to question them."
These are my brothers. They were killed. I don't have any other brothers. They took their property, ransacked their homes. They left their children traumatized. This one left 4 children, the other 7 children, and the other 4 children. The last 2 were to be married. These criminals stole their happiness. Haftar the criminal, Haftar the war criminal. There is no government in the east, there is only a criminal killing machine. Benghazi is not a city of peace, as they say. Benghazi is a city of terror, dominated by force, a city of murder.
The members of the Al-Qanya militia responsible for the Tahuna massacres fled for refuge in Benghazi. This large coastal city on the east side of Libya is still traumatized by the war against the Islamic State group. The west of the country didn't experience jihadist occupation, and it was by facing them that Marshal Khalifa Haftar took control here. Journalists cannot work freely in Benghazi. The Haftar camp wants to show strict order and discipline. This military college trains future officers for the LNA, the self-proclaimed Libyan National Army, supported by neighboring Egypt and Russia. When the deputy head of this school talks about the revolution, he emphasizes the chaos that was unleashed.
After the collapse of the army, of the institutions and of the security apparatus in the country, according to the instructions of the General Staff, the military college was created. The military college takes students aged 18 to 23.
من أعمار 18 سنة إلى 23 سنة.
Many young recruits joined up after the war against the Islamic State group.
Here in the East, we were much more affected by the Muslim Brotherhood and the extremists. Members of our families and other loved ones were killed in this war, so we decided to join the army. The blood of the martyrs who were sacrificed will not be wasted. We are the new blood in the army ranks, and this new blood will be better than those before.
Our motto is, we win or we die. Through training, we prepare their psychology for the sacrifice and the service to their country.
These young people also say they are suffering from the division of their country.
What hurt me the most is everything that we young people have lost since 2011 and the division of the country into East and West. It's hard for me to see my country divided. That's the most difficult thing. I have friends and family in the West, and the situation means I can't speak to them face to face or go pay them a visit. We've been speaking on the phone for 5 years from a distance. I hope that the army will win and Libya will be united.
This fracture between the east and the west of the country explains Ahmed Ben Ashur's situation. Every day he presents the news on the Al Hadat network run by the military. In 2011 he was a young revolutionary before being arrested by one of the militias in Tripoli supported by Turkey. Once out of prison he decided to go east.
I was tortured, beaten, insulted by this armed group. After the intervention of friends and neighbors, I was freed from Tripoli. I decided to abandon political activities in this city managed by militias. But in Benghazi, it's not the case. I've decided to continue my journey and support what we see as a sacred cause.
Since then, he has not seen his family, who stayed in Tripoli.
It's impossible for me to go. I would be arrested at the airport or taken to a military camp. Unfortunately, the young are now lost between wars, conflicts, and ongoing political division.
Return to the front in Sirte, where the forces of the West and the East meet, but this is a time of ceasefire. Everyone goes about their daily tasks while awaiting orders. A life of men weary from the battles they've fought since the revolution.
I was an engineer for the Al Waha oil company in 2011. We forgot everything during the war, all our past studies and our work experiences. We forgot everything. We don't have the possibility to get married now. Everybody here wants to get married and have children. They want to have prospects, but nobody is married. Every year or year and a half, a new war starts. I don't want to force a woman to live with me in a house and then head to the front in Tripoli or who knows where and leave her alone. I don't know, it's just not possible. I want to go and study overseas to get a master's or a doctorate and come back to the country with a better education for the benefit of our country and the world in general.
Leaving Libya, a dream shared by young people in the East and the West. This evening at the Tripoli port, it's the opening of an exhibition put on by Shada and her friends. Shada is exceptional in not wanting to leave Libya.
most of my friends, they all left. I'm the only one. I was like saying I'm in my own country, but I don't really feel like home because all my friends are gone. But after it, I think in 2016, life started to get a little bit better. It's not better. Sometimes the roads are blocked for some reason. Sometimes there is no electricity, there is no phone coverage, there is no internet, but yet we're still working. Doesn't make sense to a lot of people, but we try to cope.
For these young people, coping or hanging on is necessary to remember where they came from and hold on to their narrow slice of freedom won at a high price 10 years ago.
Gwendolyn de Bono with Josh Vardy, revisiting Libya for France 24. Well, that's all from this week's edition. Don't forget, of course, you can catch it and the previous editions as well on our website at france24.com. More news coming up for you very shortly. Thanks for watching.
For decades, the question of how Patrice Lumumba, the first prime minister of the newly independent Democratic Republic of the Congo, died, and the related questions of who killed him and why, were subject to much speculation.
The short answer is that Patrice Lumumba was executed by a firing squad on January 17, 1961, together with two of his ministers, Joseph Fokito and Maurice Mpolo.
Just how he came to be in that position requires a longer discussion that takes into consideration the political climate in Congo and the state of international relations at the time. This short documentary narrates in detail the circumstances that led to his arrest, torture and eventually his execution.
Lumumba was inspired by the independence movement of Africa after attending the All African Peoples Conference in Ghana in 1958. This spurred him on to organize nationalist rallies in his country, resulting in deadly protests that got him arrested and later released to negotiate Congo's independence.
He led the Democratic Republic of Congo to independence on June 30, 1960. After the country was passed on from King Leopold II, who took control of it as his private property in the 1880s, to Belgium in 1908 as a colony. Independence came with lots of problems, including a political divide and an unapologetic Belgium led by King Baudouin, who minced no words during the Independence Declaration.
Don't compromise the future with hasty reforms, and don't replace the structures that Belgium hands over to you until you are sure you can do better. Don't be afraid to come to us. We will remain by your side and give you advice. King Baudouin said.
Devait dire et remercier le roi. De l'autre côté de la tribune, quelqu'un fignole un discours non prévu au protocole. Il va dire ce qu'il ne faut pas dire.
Du roi Baudouin, qui nous rappelait comment la Belgique nous a sortis de l'esclavage, comment ils ont lutté pour nous sortir des maladies du sommeil et patati patata. Ça a été un choc. Nous ne nous attendions pas à ce rappel malheureux parce que nous estimions que le roi Baudouin n'avait plus de leçons à nous faire ce jour-là.
An outraged Lumumba rather gave a dramatic and angry speech in reply to King Baudouin. This left the king startled and frowning and caught the world's attention. Lumumba spoke forcefully of the violence and humiliations of colonialism, from the ruthless theft of African land to the way that French-speaking colonists talked to Africans as adults do to their children. Political independence was not enough, he said. Africans had to also benefit from the great wealth in their soil.
Là, Lumumba se lève, qui n'était pas programmé comme devant parler à ce moment-là. Il se lève et il parle. Il fait un discours très militant.
Combattants de l'indépendance, aujourd'hui victorieux, je vous salue au nom du gouvernement congolais. Nous avons connu les ironies, les insultes, les coups que nous devions subir au matin, midi et soir, parce que nous étions des nègres.
Rappelez-vous comment on traitait le blanc par rapport au noir. Rappelez-vous dans les écoles quelle place nous occupions. Rappelez-vous tout l'apartheid. Alors évidemment, réaction immédiate de toute la délégation belge. D'abord, beaucoup d'agitation pendant que Lumumba parle.
Qui oubliera enfin les fusillades où périt tant de nos frères, ceux qui ne voulaient plus se soumettre au régime d'injustice, d'oppression et d'exploitation.
This heightened Belgium's disinterest in Patrice Lumumba, whose government was already being opposed by his political rival and president, Joseph Kasavubu.
C'était mal reçu par les Belges, mais nous avons tout à fait répondu à nos aspirations.
Et au moment du dîner, on demande à Lumumba de présenter des excuses. Il ne s'en fait pas. Il présente les excuses en disant « Je pensais que je devais dire un certain nombre de choses, je les ai dites, donc si ça a blessé, je m'en excuse et je demande qu'on tourne la page et que nous puissions voir les choses autrement. » Mais il était trop tard. La majesté était lésée. Et la majesté lésée a décidé le soir même de se venger et tout a commencé.
Only 3 months into the new and independent Congo, soldiers mutinied against Belgian commanders who refused to leave. And some regions, including the mineral-rich Katanga and South Kasai, rebelled against the central government and seceded with the backing of Belgian troops who were sent to protect their interests.
For the Belgian army and General Janssens, who commands it, had the impudence to say that independence means nothing.
The Congolese government called for the United Nations help and a resolution was passed by the Security Council calling on Belgium to withdraw its troops. United Nations peacekeepers were sent into the Congo to restore order and use force as the last resort to secure the country's territories.
However, Belgium did not leave and the UN failed to provide the Congolese government with military assistance as demanded by Patrice Lumumba and sanctioned by the Security Council. The United Nations also ignored the Prime Minister's appeal to send troops to Katanga but rather chose to negotiate with secession leader Moise Tshombe. The United States was a strong ally of Belgium and had a stake in Congo's uranium.
There were only two countries in the world that supplied cobalt at that time, Soviet Union and the Congo. And cobalt is extremely important for jet engines and all sorts of high technology. And we could not get it from the Soviet Union because it was a security commodity. So Congo was our only source.
It is suspected to have planned an assassination as disclosed by CIA agent Larry Devlin, head of CIA station, Congo.
I received a message saying that people in Washington were highly concerned about the activities of the Prime Minister and that they hoped that he would go, there would be a change in the government. The next thing I knew, I received a cable saying that someone by the name of Joe would arrive in Leopoldville and I was to take my instructions from him. And the instructions were that I was to remove him physically from, in other words, assassinate Lumumba. I asked first, whose instructions are these? And he said, they've come from President Eisenhower.
By September, the Congolese President Kasavubu dismissed Lumumba as Prime Minister after receiving a telegram from Belgian Prime Minister Gaston Eyskens. Lumumba also declared Kasavubu deposed. This ushered in the takeover by Army Chief Colonel Mobutu Sese Seko, who placed Lumumba under house arrest and guarded by his troops and the United Nations troops.
Lumumba had just promoted his personal secretary, Joseph Mobutu, to Army Chief of Staff. Mobutu was to coordinate with the UN troops to stop the country's descent into anarchy. Instead, he turned to Larry Devlin.
Mobutu said that the army was very unhappy with the Prime Minister because he was turning the army over to the Soviets. He wanted to mount a coup d'etat, but there was one condition. They had to know that they would have the support of the United States government. I had tried and failed to achieve by legal means what they wanted, the United States government wanted, so I stood up and shook his hand. Finally, it took me a while to do this, and said, I guarantee you the support of the United States government. And the coup d'etat, he said the coup will take place within a week, and it did.
Patrice Lumumba slipped away on his own accord on November 27, after a United Nations vote to seat President Kasavubu's delegation rather than his own. Fearing that he would lose the protection of the United Nations force, Lumumba headed for his own stronghold of Stanleyville, 1,000 miles to the east.
He escaped with his wife and baby son hidden in the back of a car leaving his residence. They headed towards the east where he had loyal followers in Kisangani, then Stanleyville. He engaged villagers on his way. They had to traverse the Sankuru River, after which friendly territory began. Patrice Lumumba and several companions crossed the river in a dugout canoe to commandeer a ferry to go back and fetch the rest of the group, including his wife and son.
But by the time they returned to the other bank, government troops pursuing them had arrived. According to one survivor, Lumumba's famous eloquence almost persuaded the soldiers to let them go. Events like this are often burnished in retrospect, but however the encounter happened, Lumumba seems to have risked his life to try to rescue the others, leading to his arrest.
Je retourne. Ne fais pas ça. Je te l'interdis, c'est de la folie. Tu dois aller à Stanleyville, c'est ton devoir de militant.
J'ai laissé se venger sur ma femme et sur ma fille. On dit après que j'ai laissé faire ça.
C'est du suicide, Patrice.
Je vais leur parler, ils sont pas nombreux. Ils m'écouteront.
C'est la folie.
Mokonzi, tolingi kosala mabe te, kasi esengeli yolanda biso. Soki te, bakoboma biso.
Si vous m'amenez, c'est moi qu'on tuera. Mais sachez qu'on vous le pardonnera pas et que vous aurez à le regretter. C'est moi qui vous ai donné le commandement de la force publique alors que tout était aux mains des Européens. Si ce sol buvait mon sang, ce sera votre propre destruction.
Il a raison. Moi, je suis lumumbiste. Je reste avec lui. Tikabozoba, bokangami no konabino. Limisa Mokonzi. Batindi biso, ndemos.
He was captured and another plea to the United Nations to save him fell on fears. Flown to Leopold Villa, now Kinshasa, where he was humiliated in public in the presence of journalists, United Nations officials and his wife, Pauline.
Ce qui m'a frappé, c'est qu'il était armé. Je dis, oh là là, il n'en sortira pas. On amène Lumumba à la villa du colonel Mobutu. Mobutu regarde les soldats mal.
Colonel Mobutu ordered his detention at a military prison at Iceville, 100 miles from Leopold Villa. For 6 weeks, Lumumba was kept in cells, and that's where he wrote letters to the United Nations for help and to his wife to calm her nerves. On January 13, 1961, the Iceville garrison mutinied, demanding higher pay and threatening to put Lumumba back in power.
Devlin, the CIA operative, sent an alarming cable to Washington. Station and embassy believe present government may fall within few days. Result would almost certainly be chaos and return of Lumumba to power. He added, refusal to take drastic steps at this time will lead to defeat of US policy in Congo.
The next day, Lawrence Devlin, the CIA agent, was informed that Mobutu was going to transfer Lumumba to a prison in a safer place. 3 days later, Lumumba and his 2 former ministers were flown to the province of Katanga, the stronghold of his arch-enemy Moise Tshombe, on January 17 while being beaten so badly that the pilot warned the violence was threatening the flight. As he stumbled off the plane in the provincial capital of Elizabethville, blindfolded, his hands bound behind his back, he was kicked and beaten by Katangan soldiers, thrown into a jeep and driven off into custody by Katangi's police and military under the supervision of Belgian forces. They were driven to a colonial villa owned by a wealthy Belgian, Villa Bruet, and the beatings continued by both the Congolese and Belgian forces. By that evening, they were semi-conscious and had been visited by Katanji's cabinet minister, President Dushanbe himself. Later around 10, a decision was taken on their fate and they were dragged from Villa Bruet into a nearby bush where a firing squad awaited them. The execution was commanded by Belgian Captain Julian Gat and Belgian Police Commissioner Frans Verscher, who had overall command.
They were shot separately by a big tree as President Dushanbe and two of his cabinet ministers looked on. Being the last to be shot, Patrice Lumumba watched on as his ministers were being executed. The bodies were quickly thrown in shallow graves.
Tu leur diras simplement que j'étais arrivé 50 ans trop tôt. Ce que nous voulions pour notre pays, d'autres ne l'auraient voulu. Ma chère Pauline, lorsque ces mots te parviendront, je ne serai plus en vie. Tu diras à mes enfants que l'avenir du Congo est beau et qu'il attend d'eux la reconstruction de notre dignité. Tu leur diras que tout au long de notre lutte, jamais je n'ai douté un seul instant du triomphe de la cause pour laquelle mes compagnons et moi avons donné notre vie.
Va les chercher. Monsieur Lumumba.
To conceal their crimes the next morning of January 18th, the Interior Minister Godfried Munongo called a senior Belgian policeman, Gerard Seat, to his office and ordered that the bodies disappeared. You destroy them, you make them disappear. How you do it, it doesn't interest me. All I want is that it happens, that they disappear. Once it is done, nobody will talk about it. Finished. Gerard Seat recalled Munongo's orders.
Gerald Seat said he and another helper exhumed the corpses and hacked them in pieces and put them into the acid. But we hadn't got enough, so we burned what we could in those bottles. For the rest, I know that my helper made a fire and put them in, and we destroyed everything. We were there 2 days. We did things an animal wouldn't do. And that's why we were drunk, stone drunk. We couldn't do things like that. Cut your own, no, no, no. Nobody could say now, today, it's there, it happened. That's impossible, you couldn't. Gerald Seat was quoted in a BBC documentary, Who Killed Lumumba?
Just as planned, Lumumba's death was announced a month later on February 13, 1961. Interior Minister Munongo announced that the 3 prisoners killed their guards and escaped in a getaway car before they were recognized by villagers, who beat them to death. the world went ballistic, including anti-imperialist leaders such as Ernesto Che Guevara of Cuba and Dr. Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana.
Bajo la bandera de las Naciones Unidas en el Congo fue asesinado Lumumba. Y esas eran las Naciones Unidas que pretendían los norteamericanos que vinieran a inspeccionar nuestro territorio. Esas mismas Naciones Unidas.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, I appear before you today on a sad and solemn occasion, the first meeting of the General Assembly since the murder of the Prime Minister of the Congo, Patrice Lumumba. History records many occasions when rulers of states have been done to death. The assassination of Patrice Lumumba, however, is unique in that this is the first time in history that the ruler of a country has been killed in the very presence of the United Nations forces, whom he himself had invited to his country to restore law and order.
Lumumba's assassination resonated throughout the world.
The truth was hidden despite international protests at Belgian embassies nationwide. In 1999, Ludo de Vita's book titled The Assassination of Lumumba presented new evidence taken from documents long hidden in official archives and interviews of surviving witnesses.
The Belgian court ordered the return of the tooth of the DRC's first Prime Minister, Patrice Lumumba, to his family in the DRC. The tooth is the only remaining body part of Patrice Lumumba. The decision to return his remains has been well received by many Congolese in the DRC. Mr. Lumumba's daughter has described it as a great victory for the dignity of black people. The Congolese independence hero was assassinated in 1961 by rebels from Katanga province. His body is reported to have been dismembered and dissolved in acid. A Belgian soldier is thought to have pulled his tooth from his corpse and taken it to Belgium. Patrice Lumumba became the DRC's Prime Minister in 1960 at the age of 34. He was a strong advocate for an end to colonial rule. The court's decision will end years of lobbying by activists and his family members for the return of his remains. Chris Sochamringa, SABC News, Kinshasa.
And when we saw him, we started screaming, JJ, JJ.
That a coup will not succeed if the atmosphere, the climate is not calling for it.
He told Ghanaians, I have hard work for you.
Christianize me if you may, but don't try to Europeanize me.
In June 1979, Ghana was at a crossroad. Another military coup was at hand. a young Air Force pilot who a few weeks before had been court-martialed and was awaiting execution, was broken out of jail by his colleagues to lead what would be later known as the June 4th Revolution. Little was known of this man who would later be instrumental in changing the future of Ghana forever. His name, Jerry Rawlings. Jerry Rawlings was born in Accra, Ghana, on the 22nd of June 1947 to his mother Victoria Abokchui and his Scottish father James Ramsey. He attended Ghana's prestigious Achimota School. An elite school at the time, Achimota was founded on the principle of providing African students with the British model of a public education. The school boasts of an impressive alumni, with Ghana's first president Kwame Nkrumah, Gambia's Sadawada Jawara, and Zimbabwe's president Robert Mugabe, all being former students at different times in the school's history.
I must say that it probably was one of the finest times of my life. You know, Chimoda School. It's a place to be proud of.
I noticed him, yes, because he was very visible and bullied us even though we were in the same class. Not in a very bad way, but you know, bullying is bullying. And so you can't help but notice him. But I never thought that we'll come this far.
By collective effort, that the nation's problems can be solved.
Before his fame as a revolutionary, Jerry Rawlings was unknown to most of Ghana. In March 1968, he began his training as a pilot officer.
I've wanted to fly from the age of 6. Honest. I was standing next to my mother, you know, in a compound house when the young men also in the house, you know, asked me what I'd like to be when I grew up. And I said, I'd like to be a pilot. And bang, my mother slapped me on the back. Oh, yes, yes. You'll be a doctor. You'll be a scientist. I mean, the whole house, the compound became quiet, shocked at what had just happened. I never gave up my dream.
He graduated in January 1969 and was commissioned a pilot officer. And because of his exceptional skill, he won the coveted Speedbird Trophy.
The Speedbird Trophy went to Lieutenant J.J. Rawlings for being the best Air Force cadet of the flying training school.
I won the Speedbird Trophy. In those days, we didn't have televisions. You know, we had what they call the newsreels in movie houses. But my mother was not interested.
He earned the rank of flight lieutenant in April of 1978. The early years of independence in Ghana were filled with great hope for the future, with the country's first president Kwame Nkrumah's leadership set to catapult Ghana into a new era. But over the years, Nkrumah's regime became less accommodating and declared the nation a one-party state. While on a state visit to Vietnam and China in 1966, Nkrumah was deposed from power in a coup.
I was at school. So how did the people around him, how did they conduct or misconduct themselves in such a way as to bring so much hatred to Dr. Kwame Nkrumah?
What followed was a period of military coups, failed civilian governments that left the people dissatisfied. Widespread corruption made life difficult for the people of Ghana. This led to growing anger and resentment.
Ghana then, everything was monopolized. I remember our basic food like beans and gari was only sold. I remember at that time Malata was sold by one woman. One, believe you me, one person was selling that. Only one.
There was no soap. Just bath and soap, there was none. Toothpaste, there was none. Nothing. No food. And we got to know that Ghana was almost just getting to a ground.
But the point is that we have set the example. We have shown that we're capable of doing it.
Jerry Rawlings came into the public eye when on the 28th of May 1979, Rawlings, together with 6 other soldiers, were arrested by the militia for an attempted coup d'etat on the government of General Fred Akufo. Rawlings appeared before a general court-martial charged with leading a squad of soldiers on the 15th of May 1979.
I keep describing it as turning on the gas in a kitchen. That's how volatile it was. From a distance, all you needed to do was to ignite a match and throw it inside. And that's what I could have done in 79, 15th May.
I was praying for the best. I also knew exactly what was going on in the country and knew that he had taken the flag for all of us. Therefore, if he had to die for his conviction, I knew he would prefer to do that.
He was found guilty and awaiting execution. The trial was a public one that was meant to deter any future coups and was broadcast for all of Ghana to see and hear.
They were, they were trading some things amongst themselves, the prosecution and the lawyers and whatnot, and severally and whatnot, those terms they use. So I got up and grabbed the microphone, said, I don't understand these terms and all that's going on, neither do my boys. And I'm just here, and I'm taking responsibility for everything that's happened, and to leave my men alone. But I wanted to make sure that they hear what I have to say first.
He made an unforgettable speech in court and said,
I am not an expert in economics, and I am not an expert in law, but I am an expert in working on an empty stomach, wondering when and where the next meal will come from. I know what it feels like going to bed with a headache for want of food in the stomach.
He was an embodiment of the reaction, the disappointment, the great disappointment of the people of Ghana.
Instead, the name Rawlings became the symbol of hope and deliverance for the people of Ghana. On the 4th of June of that same year, a mutiny by officers in support of his cause broke him out of jail, sparking the revolution.
So what would that mean?
Yao Graham was in university then and remembers the mood of the time.
It was in the middle of this split national mood that J. Rawlings was arrested and reported as somebody who was planning to clean up the mess by overthrowing these people. Now it's important to understand this because he didn't say anything. The prosecution said this was what it was about. But such was the mood that people identified that actually this guy is saying exactly the way we are all feeling. So he became a hero on account of the honesty of the prosecution.
1979, I was almost 10 years. If I recollect, that June 4th, when we heard that something had happened, I think it was on the news. That's the first time you know that something is going on. They start playing Ghana national anthem. So we knew that another person had taken charge of the country. But who, they were not really sure. Some people went and spied and realized that when he alighted from the helicopter, the men picked him up. And when we saw him, we started screaming, JJ, JJ. And my dad would shake his head and say, wow, we are in trouble and our kids are hailing this man.
When you consider, the difficulties, the shock effect that June 4th should have had on us, should have woken us up. And I do remember, to be quite honest, in those volatile, violent, difficult days when people were calling for let the blood flow, etc., there were some intellectuals and some diplomats who, I guess, have a better knowledge of history, who were asking me that I was exercising too much control. I was restraining it too much.
Jerry Rawlings and his soldiers formed the Armed Forces Revolutionary Council, AFRC.
I didn't expect to be here.
Later, the AFRC carried out what Rawlings described as a house cleaning exercise. This was basically the identifying of leaders that were deemed corrupt. The leaders were either sentenced to prison for their crimes or in some cases executed by the AFRC. 3 months later, on 24th September 1979, the AFRC allowed Hila Liman to head Ghana and the People's National Party, PNP. However, Hila Liman's presidency was short-lived. On 31st December 1981, after only 2 years as president, Liman's administration was cut short when Rawlings ousted him in yet another coup, claiming that his government was taking Ghana down a road of economic ruin.
But it was his second coming, as we call it here, the 1981 coup d'etat, that then made him the figure that he is today. That was when people encountered him directly or indirectly. It was a fairly difficult period.
The PNDC is a government that is or should be run by the people.
I ended up in office not because I wanted to be chairman, to be head of state, but it was just my passion to see justice done, my love of freedom. That's what puts me always in this position, or put me in this position.
Rawlings' government was called the Provisional National Defense Council, PNDC. PNDC was made up of both civilians and soldiers. The government set about to restore the nation's pride and infrastructure through hard work, determination, and mass inclusion.
The politics of the country was being driven very much by ordinary people, by young people, particularly students. And a lot of the people who fanned out across the country to build the base for the PNDC. Students took months, university students took months from school to go and lift cocoa for export. The symbolism of that was very important.
I belong to the generation that actually had to stop schooling, and we had to go out working to get cocoa from the farms to the ports to be exported and other things. It brought us awareness. If earlier on we thought there was a thin divide between the people and government, now that alone told us that we are the government and it's the people who make up the government, and that it is time for us to stand up for our own rights. That is what Jerry Rawlings represents for most of the people of my generation.
A hands-on leader, Rawlings ensured the rebuilding of Ghana would be shared by all. Soldier and civilian took part, with no task too big or too small.
His passion is the underdog not being maltreated or mistreated, and looking at a situation where if we have, let's say, 6 million Ghanaians He wants to bring all 6 million Ghanaians to a certain level of livelihood.
I know him to be a passionate man. He wants things done immediately. I always say Kwame Nkrumah always wants things done yesterday. And Rawlings wanted things done immediately, quick. They have that one in common.
He's the type who does not mind getting his hand dirty. He'll be passing here and maybe we are doing a cleanup. He'll come and join us. He'll just get and come and join you. He doesn't see himself as being above people.
I remember one of the pictures. He was at Ashiama, cleaning, were standing there folding their hands and looking at him inside the gutter. Your president.
The young government was beginning to change the face of Ghana, but the economic reforms challenge they faced was one that caused Rawlings' rule to change drastically.
I remember in 1983, before the budget was presented, that budget devalued Ghana's currency from 2.75 cedis to the dollar to 29 cedis to the dollar. Previous governments have been overthrown for much smaller devaluations. The long-term effect of these economic policies has been to worsen inequality.
Rawlings' government's response to its critics was to clamp down on opposition. The media in particular was hit hard. Haruna Atta, a journalist, shares his experience.
Those were what one would describe as the bad old days when journalists were under siege, sort of. At that time, he was very much seen as the dictator, like the quintessential African dictator.
Rawlings and his government had to instill measures that before would seem to be a compromise of their status quo, dealing with the West.
Pope John Paul described capitalism, the capitalist economic philosophy, as the savagery of capitalism. What are you going to say about us in the so-called developing world, in Africa?
Rawlings is a man of many faces.
There was a time I wanted to be a priest, you know. Yeah.
Charismatic.
How are you? I'm going to take you together with a flower.
And now, his long-time secret as an artist has been finally exposed.
You may not believe it, but I'd much rather be known as an artist than as a president. Just as I would much rather probably be known for flying skill than being a president. Maybe it's because through this you can see my power of observation, my sense of precision, my striving for excellence. I don't know where you found this, but the point is I've kept quiet about this thing because I haven't done my wife's portrait yet, you know. If I'd done my wife's portrait also, I would have felt good about, you know, displaying this.
A family man, he is married to Dr. Nana Adjeman Rawlings, his childhood sweetheart.
He doesn't remember. I remember the first place I met him in primary school at a school called Mrs. Sam's School. And he obviously didn't recognize me because I was black, I was dark. Because this lady was fair, and there were a lot of fair kids in the school. And she actually used to discriminate between the fair and the dark ones. So the fair ones knew each other and the dark ones knew each other. So he didn't see me, but I saw him. It's just a joke I crack all the time.
Nana, in the first place, was somebody I noticed from the age of 14, somebody I've been in love with. It wasn't until about 5-6 years later that she would even allow me to hold her hands, type of thing. Oh, it took a long time.
Together, they have 4 children: Ezanata, Amina, Ya Asentwa, and the only son, Kimathi Rawlings. As if to protect them, Rawlings, being in the center stage of politics, created a deliberate wedge between his children and himself. In the event that his life would be taken, his children would be able to cope in his absence.
I avoided my daughters, for some years. I mean, I'd see them, but I did not want to develop any emotional attachment with them. I mean, I longed for it. I wanted to hug them and things like that, but I was afraid if we developed that emotional attachment and something happened, I wasn't too sure how they would be able to cope or handle it. And that's why I kept that distance. You see what I mean? Deliberately, because of the reason I just gave.
There was not a good balance in terms of family and work. So I had to be mother and father to them almost throughout their life till they were adults. Yeah. It wasn't easy.
He is also famous for being stubborn.
In being stubborn, mind you, while I was in high office as chairman of the PNDC within the revolution or head of state, my stubbornness did not translate itself into stopping our people from doing something that I felt would hurt us. One would sometimes allow it in order not to break the growing confidence in our people. They sometimes needed to make a mistake. My stubbornness did not stand in the way.
In the early 1990s, the African continent began to experience a new wave of political structure, the return of multi-party politics. Much like the 1960s, as country after country gained independence from colonial powers, now the people wanted more. Rawlings, always able to read the mood of the people, was quick to embrace it, changing his government from military to civilian.
He did not fight against it, but he did say that though he personally did not believe in multi-party politics, but if that's what Ghanaians want, they would have it. So the constitution was written, and from 1992 to the present, we've had one of the most stable democracies in Africa.
As required by the constitutional mandate, Rawlings' term of office ended in 2001 and was succeeded by John Kufuor, his main political rival.
People like to make all kinds of claims about Rawlings, that he didn't want to hand over. Absolute rubbish. I will use this occasion to tell them something that they never imagined. Had we, any one of us, dared to suggest that we're going to stay on for one more day, we would have lost the complete support of the masses.
Jerry Rawlings is not your typical serious military man. He can also humor a crowd.
My colleague, ministers of state, honorable lecturers of the various faculties, your excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I think I prefer the lady. I prefer the lady. I mean, this little warmth who you want to enjoy, he wants to come and
While he was president, Rawlings was able to use a grant of $50,000 from the Hunger Project cash prize he had won as seed money to sponsor the establishment of the University of Development Studies, a state-owned university, the first of its kind in the northern region of Ghana.
Before UDS was cited, people who attained higher education, most of them had to travel for 2 days in order to get to school. That tells you how desperate it was for people in the north to get educated.
In 2010, Jerry Rawlings was named the African Union envoy to Somalia.
I believe the African Union has every reason to feel proud. This is one political and military exercise that we've taken up almost on our own and won for the good of that country, for the good of all of us.
During his time as envoy, Somalia, as well as other parts of Northeast Africa, experienced a catastrophic famine that the world called an emergency. Jerry Rawlings was on the ground to see the results of the famine and was deeply moved at the sorry state of the mothers and children he met. In an interview with CNN, Rawlings shared his distressful experience.
When you look at the resilience, the fortitude, the strength in these mothers, you know, holding onto these feeble, fragile children, as sorry as you feel for them, you cannot help but also admire, you know, their sense of courage and determination. I mean, let's do what we can.
You're clearly moved by what you saw.
You may like him, you may not like him, you may agree with some of his methods, or you may not agree with some of his methods, but you cannot be in denial. You shouldn't be in denial because he's occupied a major part of the country's history.
After 18 years in power, where you can say that actually, if you look at the sweep of Ghanaian history, Jerry Rawlings is the second most important ruler in Ghana's history after Kwame Nkrumah.
Nelson Mandela once said, "When a man has done what he considers to be his duty to his people and his country, he can rest in peace." This, perhaps, is the case of the boy who had a dream to fly, and to fly he did, but he also became president. John Jerry Rawlings, the man who came, saw, and conquered.